Hi, Alexis.
Hello, Rachel. Good to be here. And a great
Yes.
topic on partings and goodbyes and how that relates to our attachment style. Would you like to introduce the topic today?
Well, I think I'll introduce the topic by asking you a question
Awesome.
because the topic is about partings and reunions, because this is a topic that comes up explicitly a lot in my work with couples about how they part at the beginning of the day and reunite at the end of the day, or if they're not living together, they haven't seen each other for a few days, or FIFO workers that. So I'm always very interested to ask couples, what's it like when you come back together? What's it like when you say goodbye? But the question I wanted to ask you is, have you ever arrived early at an international airport arrivals lounge and watched people reunite at the gate?
I have seen that. It's a quite a gorgeous thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
and
love it. I love it. If I didn't have to pay so much for parking, I would do it just as a really fun day out, just watching
we
people.
could do an excursion, a yoga psychology community excursion, and just go and observe. Wouldn't that be fascinating? And you can't help but make up the stories about where they've been, how long they've been separated. That's a beautiful image to start with. And I mean, you're right, there's a lot of diversity in the way that people come back together.
I love watching the arrivals lounge at the international airport, because some people are like so excited, and you think, gosh, maybe they haven't seen them for a year, and other people are like, hi, they grab the bag and wheel it for their loved one, and it's these different degrees of joy and celebration upon being reunited. And I'm also,
It reminds me of how it would have felt to welcome home a son or a husband from war. I mean, can you even fathom that sense of, potential loss and then receiving your loved one again, knowing they were safe? Yeah, massive.
just so memorable. And this topic of partings or departures and reunions, often when I ask couples, particularly about any stories they've got about being reunited after an absence, or how is it at the beginning of the day and the end of the day, I glean things that I wouldn't otherwise find out about if I hadn't asked that question. Just last week, I asked a couple about any partings stories or reuniting stories. And the wife had been willing early in their relationship to move cities and quit her job. And when she arrived in the new city, he didn't act all that happy to see her. And that had been the start. They ended up getting back together after a 6-month separation, but that had been the beginning of the end for her, because upon being reunited, following several weeks of not seeing each other, she was expecting him to celebrate her very existence and celebrate her arrival. And I think we do expect this. Every culture, has this in their culture. And when that moment goes awry, I think it sends a powerful message, as it did to this woman. And the other image I want to conjure up in your mind is the image of picking up a child from early childhood education or daycare.
That's what I'm thinking, yes.
Do you remember what your kids were like when you'd let them go, when you'd say goodbye, and then when you'd pick them up again? What do you remember about that?
Yeah, well, this is quite fresh. I was talking with a girlfriend only this week about that. She's saying that her young fella finds it really hard to say goodbye. So there is obviously some quite unconscious behaviour where we landed on it, because she was asking for advice, ways to support him. And just through the discussion, we landed on using it as an opportunity for her to self-soothe, and in doing so demonstrate ways for him to self-soothe. I haven't had a chance to check out how that went, but it brings to mind, the need for attachment with ourselves. That's what comes up for me when I think about this particular topic. And I'm also loving, Rachel, that you've included, both ends of the cycle, the parting and the reunion. It reminds me of birth, receiving my child, and what a relief that was to know that she'd arrived safely, and also the partings and the death that happens. And it brought to mind, particularly from a yoga perspective, the letting go, our ability to physically and emotionally let go. So yeah, there's a lot in this. What seems to be quite simple, it's actually very profound.
Yeah, and I was telling you on our walk yesterday that I really got interested in this, how sensitized we could be to this this phenomenon. When I did a retreat that was a contact, improv and NVC retreat, which is such a strange combination of things, but we had to do this kind of movement where we were in contact at all times with the other person until we broke off contact and found a new partner. This was one of the exercises. And the facilitator, who's a psychologist, he asked us to notice in ourselves how we felt, observe our thoughts, our body, our feelings when our partner would break away from us, when we were the one who was sort of left behind or abandoned. And in such a simple exercise where we were even instructed to pull away and find a new partner and kind of move with them for 1 minute or 2 minutes and then find a new partner, even then I noticed, because I was paying attention, I noticed that when somebody would leave me, I would feel a little jolt of something I interpret as rejection, a little jolt of anxiety, and a little thought of, well, what's wrong with me? So this partings business can bring up abandonment stuff for all of us, and anything less than a perfectly secure attachment, which doesn't really exist. It's a good theory though. We could either sort of do the dismissive thing of I don't need you anyway, or the preoccupied thing of come back, why are you leaving me? And it can be very, very subtle, and a way to manage our anxiety, our separation. This is about separation anxiety, which we all had as children, because when our mother handed us over to somebody else as an infant, probably all of us had those moments of, oh, what's happening? Oh, mom. In fact, I got to cuddle a baby last night at our Christmas in July party at the practice. And this gorgeous 6-month-old realized at some point I wasn't mum, and he was looking for mum. And then as soon as he saw her, he, and as soon as he was back in her arms again, reunited with her, he was so much happier. And so this thing of being reunited and of parting, how we feel now at these moments is rich with material for us.
So much. Okay, so really what we're talking about is how to deal with our experience of abandonment. In fact, this came up in the practice group today. Say it again.
I mean, it's an emotive way of putting it, but if you're not.
Well, it is. Yeah. It came up today in the practice group when we got talking about when we receive a no. It's a little bit different, but it's similar. And receiving that as a rejection. And I think you're right. It's really valuable to break it down to those very subtle moments, those really micro moments. For example, I'm thinking about even when I'm sitting with a client and focus is full attention, but if I shift my focus away to write some notes, for example, sometimes I notice they almost kind of position themselves like to catch my eye or, to bring me back. Like at this subtle level, we must, it's a break. We take it, it's a hurt.
It's a mini rupture. I mean, even at the end of a massage, when it's all over, I feel a little bit of sadness. And I know that my clients, when I kind of say we've got to wrap up, our time's up, I know that some of them feel the rupture of the session coming to an end. I've felt that with my therapist in the past. This is a normal part of life. There is nothing pathological about feeling anxiety or a little bit of a rupture or a little bit of rejection, when in these moments in life, it's because we're so hardwired for connection, and yet life requires these partings and reunions all the time. So we just work with the flow and the rhythm of our own anxiety.
And what I'm hearing in relation especially to what you'd written in the lead up to today's event was that it highlights our need for love and our need for connection, and that we all long for closeness and we all long for intimacy. And so let's acknowledge the feeling of abandonment or the feeling of rejection as a need for a sustained, consistent, secure connection that actually we can do something about, right?
Exactly. And at this point, let me just share the experiments that have happened over decades. Some people will already be aware of the strange situation experiments, started in the beginning by developmental psychologist Mary Ainsworth decades ago. Mary Ainsworth took toddlers, and the reason it was called the strange situation is she had the mother bring the toddler into a beautiful room with a kindly stranger and some, very cool toys. And then the mother would say to the toddler, "Mummy's just going out here. I'll be back very soon." And they observed, and the kindly stranger, tried to redirect the toddler. And they observed the toddler's responses, and they could more or less, if there's any psychology students watching, please comment if I'm not telling this correctly, but they could categorize them into at least 3 categories. Toddlers who threw themselves on the floor behind the door and cried and cried and cried and couldn't soothe themselves and kept crying until mum came back. Another category of toddlers had almost no reaction. They were sort of like, they'd already given up on attachment. They'd already become a bit dismissive or avoidant, which is kind of heartbreaking. They'd sort of, mum would leave, but because toddler and mum didn't have a strong bond, they sort of had already shut their emotions down. And then the third category would rush to the door, mummy, would cry, but when the kindly stranger would redirect them and say, "It's okay, she's coming back, come over here," they would just naturally soothe themselves. They'd take a breath and they'd be redirected, and they might sort of glance at the door, but they would soothe because they trusted, first stage of development, trust versus mistrust. They trusted that mum would come back or that dad would come back. And I think the strange situation experiments really show us that it's quite natural, even with the secure attachment style, to feel some anxiety in a relationship if it seems like there's, a disconnect that's about to happen or has happened. But that we, that will happen, and we can soothe ourselves and refocus and develop some trust, not in our mother or our partner necessarily because we're adults, but in ourselves and perhaps in our community, that we can delay the gratification that a toddler can't, to, have someone immediately there, which is great if we can, but maybe we can't. So we can delay that gratification until it's possible. But in the meantime, we can ground, we can soothe, we can calm ourselves. But the idea that we have no anxiety around separation or partings suggests actually that we maybe have a dismissive attachment style. So, that's interesting too.
So are you suggesting that parents who are struggling leaving their children might not need to be so hard on themselves, that there's a learning in the process for both the parent and the child about how do I handle these situations which are going to come up again and again?
Yeah, because the toddler has the iterative experience, as children do, as adults do, of this is hard, this doesn't feel good. Oh, and on the other side, everything was okay, nothing bad happened, she came back again. We must have these experiences to build efficacy and to build trust and confidence in ourselves and in life. If you don't go through pain and hardship at all, then you don't get that resilience, right? So
Rachel, I have a question for you, and that is, how much do you think that our difficulties with partings is due to our difficulty with letting go and with death and with endings as a culture, I'm talking?
Well, yeah, it's a great question, and all of them pertain to grief and grieving.
Yes,
Yeah.
okay. So avoidance of grieving. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think there's many moments of grief all over the place, where we might grieve how we behaved in the past, wishing we'd acted differently, or where, you know, somebody has said they need a break and we won't see them for a while, or I mean a myriad of situations, a lost job, so many losses. And if we're not good with grief, and our culture's not great with grief, then letting go, because grieving is about acceptance in the end. Not so much, I don't think so much of letting go as acceptance, you know, as our Jungian friends say, growing bigger than the problem, you know, being able to incorporate it into your story in such a way that there's a true acceptance. And I guess in that there's a letting go of tension around it. Perhaps that's how I see it.
Well, that was where our conversation on the riverbank yesterday went to. At the end, we were talking about certain practices. You were talking about self-compassion as a means of softening into the anxiety of letting go, or the anxiety of parting, the anxiety of loss. That allows for an opening, a bigger capacity to see that we're more than just the anxiety, there's something bigger. And you also spoke about self-talk as an opportunity to, I imagine it's a self-soothing as well, to again grow bigger than just the small grasping or the small gripping. That was my memory of yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely. I really am connecting again with Professor Kristen Neff's model of self-compassion, which I'll just quickly outline my understanding of it. The first step is mindfulness. Now, some practices don't go beyond mindfulness, which is where I think there are limitations.
Yeah.
When we're really suffering, you know, mindfulness is great if you're not really suffering, but she's interested in compassion, which is about really, really suffering. I won't be long. I'm just on a live. I'll be out in 5 or 10 minutes. And she suggests that without mindfulness, we can't possibly change our self-talk, because we're so lost in our self-talk and lost in our pain and lost in the story that goes with that pain, that it's impossible to be kind to ourselves. So it starts with mindfulness. What am I feeling? What's happening in my body and my emotions? What am I telling myself? Second of all, kindness, which is the self-talk, speaking kindly to yourself the way you would, and just that simple old chestnut from CBT, which is now in many therapies, of if you had someone you really loved and cared about who was going through something similar, how would you be with them? What would you say to them? What would you do for them? Now say that to yourself. Be with yourself in that same way. So kindness. And the third component is shared humanity. So she said shared humanity is when we remember my anxiety is your anxiety. My loneliness is your loneliness. In other words, we've all experienced these feelings. They're universal. And our need for connection and community, while it may differ in strength from individual to individual, we all have those needs. So this universal kind of humanity that she speaks about, she says it's also the antidote to self-pity. It's very easy to think it's not fair, why me? And we get into feeling like we're the only one, the only defective one in the world. And that, you know, it's very easy. I mean, I've done it myself many times to think that you're somehow defective, that you're a victim of some situation or some other version of feeling sorry for yourself.
Yeah.
And this is not self-compassion. So the shared humanity helps us zoom out and remember, gosh, if I'm going through this, how many other humans have gone through something very similar over millennia? And it helps connect you to the rest of humankind, which even as an imaginal exercise helps with the isolation and loneliness of suffering. And so, yeah, I really love those 3 steps, but it begins with that mindfulness.
It links back to nonviolent communication really closely as well. in relation to the parting and the separation, that mindful awareness of, okay, well, I'm feeling some hurt, I'm feeling some pain.
Yeah.
And I can observe the story. I'm telling myself that it's because you don't really care about me, or I'm telling myself that I'm not that important, or I don't matter. To be mindful, okay, yes. And then the need for the kindness and the shared humanity sounds very much like Marshall Rosenberg's needs-based approach. Okay, so we all need kindness, we all need compassion. That's that's a longing.
And if anyone's come across the needs lists from NBC, they will have seen them listed as either connection needs or interdependency needs. In attachment theory, which we were talking about before, Mary Ainsworth's work, they call them attachment needs. But if you look at these lists, they're all the same kinds of words. So they're attachment needs, they're connection needs, they're interdependency needs. But also, on the other hand, of course, we have needs for autonomy, freedom, and choice, these kind of self-related needs. So there's attachment needs, and then there's self-related needs. Now, the reunions and partings topic is really interesting in terms of this topic of interdependency versus independence or autonomy. Because if we've become counter-dependent, which is the toddlers who just kind of didn't care that mum walked out the room because, the poor things have already experienced that, like, why bother? They've already given up on strong attachments and interdependence.
Yeah.
They've sort of settled for an independence that's more like counterdependence. Counterdependence is, I don't really need anyone. And it's not true. Human beings, like, I wouldn't have this shirt on my back if it wasn't for other human beings. We need each other. And yet we want to be autonomous enough and self-confident enough to be able to cope and to self-soothe if we lose connection or lose attachment. So this dance between togetherness and separateness is really the dance between the attachment needs and the self-related needs. And so I invite people to notice how they feel upon reunion with different individuals in your life, how you feel upon parting, because, this can give you information about whether you swing towards counterdependency. Oh, thank God, no, I don't want to see that person. Like, the challenge when I don't want to see somebody is to hold on to myself, knowing that I can look after myself no matter what happens. And if I am separated from someone I don't want to be separated from, I have to say goodbye because your next client is coming, Alexis. I have to know that I can hold on to myself enough to be okay, even when I have to say goodbye. So whether it's we fear the reunion or we fear the parting, both of them require this ability to hold on to ourselves, self-love, self-compassion, self-soothe, and and just learn from our own reactions to these situations.
What a lovely topic. Such a simple everyday experience with so much learning. I love that you've introduced the attachment styles and the recognition within their opportunity, within those experiences, to identify, well, am I being preoccupied, anxious, or am I being dismissive? And could I be aware of that and perhaps find some balance point? And I agree, there's any number of opportunities in the day to really need to hold ourselves. I mean, that's a practice I can't fault. Using the center of my experience to stay within myself, so that I can honour my feelings, I can honour my narrative without being overly identified. So thank you for bringing this topic, Rachel. As always, we could write a 6-week course on it, at least.
And one day we might do that.
One day we might. Thank you.
Are you able to see the comments? I
haven't checked in yet, but let me jump on now.
I can only see a couple, but my systems aren't working that
Oh,
well.
so yeah, please do post us your comments and your questions. I
We
mean,
can always answer them later as well.
that's true. I just love that spectrum that we keep coming back to, Rachel. I keep drawing this line of anxious, preoccupied, dismissive, avoidant, connection, the need for intimacy, belonging, and the need for autonomy and sense of self. There's a lot in that.
There's a lot. And so I don't have all the answers for everybody watching, but
come on, please tell us that you do.
I don't have them for myself, so I'm sorry. You're just going to have to go to someone else. No, but it's such an interesting thing to notice.
I haven't checked in yet. Sorry.
Go
ahead.
Could have been me. To notice your own reactions to different situations. Practice mindfulness around the body, the breath, your thinking, and your surroundings, those 4 platforms. And maybe even journal. If this is the first you've heard of this kind of practice, keep track of those micro moments of departures, reunions with different people in your life. You might learn a lot making a study of your own mind and body.
Definitely. Okay, so hello, lovely people watching. Elizabeth said we could all chip in for parking. Okay, so that must have been an earlier comment.
Oh, well, if we go to the arrivals lounge at the international airport.
Oh, okay, there we go, the excursion. Okay, so Christina says that she can relate to this a lot, abandonment and rejection sensitivity, and some triggering around that, especially in a romantic relationship. So thank you for that example, Christina. Yeah. Stephanie says, it feels like a safe room for me when in my appointment with my psychologist, and she feels heaviness and we have to wrap up because we know we have to go back to the scariness of the real world. In fact, that came up in the practice group as well today. Sometimes ends with me having an anxiety attack after leaving. So again, yeah, that real need. Do you have any suggestions, Rachel?
Well, my first suggestion would be anticipate. So if you know that's possibly going to happen, make an intention about how you want to hold yourself and be with yourself. Like, keep track of the time. And if you know that's likely to happen, be prepared, make a little plan. We feel more contained when we have a plan. Maybe you go and sit in your car, maybe you do some meditation or some crying or some journaling, give yourself time to manage that proactively.
I'm thinking of a beautiful client who has actually made the request of setting an alarm. Sometimes we set it 15 minutes before, sometimes it's 10, sometimes it's 5. It doesn't really matter, but we use that time just to peel away, I guess. We kind of reflect and just reconnect. And that's a simple way. You could even suggest to your practitioner, Christina, that you might want that bit of time. Equally, you might want to sit in the waiting room and just even reflect or journal, even breathing. That's a really wonderful opportunity, actually. So Jaren says, is there a way that you can easily distinguish between attachment style and personality traits of introverts and extroverts?
I'm so glad you mentioned that, Jaren, because temperament definitely comes into so many areas of our lives. And, I mentioned before that we have different strengths of needs. I'm an extrovert, so I have a strong need for social connection, whereas an introvert's need for that is not to the same degree as mine. And that's temperament. I think temperament relates to needs strength. That's one thing I would say about that.
And Joe's asking about a link. Joe, would you mind just letting us know if that is to, I take it it's Kristen Neff. And
selfcompassion.org is her website.
There you go, nice and easy. Jaren says, don't be so humble. Rachel knows all. And I can certainly vouch for the fact that my life has changed since you've been in it. And that's why we are here getting getting this really important work out. So that's the gist of the questions tonight. We can check back in later. So if you're watching this when it's not live, please do give us your comments, because we do get those. Sometimes it just takes us a little while to respond. But is there anything else you wanted to add on partings and reunions, Rachel?
Just that our favourite podcast, This Jungian Life, do have an episode on partings. I can post that in the comments later on. And would you mind mentioning our workshop, our third of 3 in our series that we're doing this year?
Yes, that's this coming Sunday, so a week from today. Yeah, and right. It's there's still some openings, so if you'd like to come along and be with us in person, that's here in Graceville at the U-Box gym. It's from 9 a.m. to 12:30, and the last couple have been really, really powerful. We're fortunate enough to be with a small group of really committed individuals. There's a lot of self-growth that happens in that space. So this one will be on, I've called it action, because it's about prompting ourselves to reach out to others, to make requests. It's about the final stage of emotional intelligence, which is bringing our inner work to the external. And if I'm honest, Rachel, that is really what you and NBC have brought to me. Again, this came up in the practice group today, where I think in these circles of sensitive types, or people who are committed to personal development, I think there is a myth that we can do it all on our own, and it's just not true. But you have validated that for me, and I now have been so active in connection and community. It has changed. It really has changed my whole life, and I can see that happening also in the group. So if that resonates with any of you, come along. That's August the 7th it's going to be, and yeah, I'll post a link so that you can book your place.
Yes, if you could post that in the comments. And we have a retreat coming up in November, which we'll speak more about as we go forward, but it's from the 18th to the 22nd of November, which will be facilitated by Alexis and myself on North Stradbroke Island, a very beautiful part of the world.
Very beautiful part of the world.
Keep that in your minds also. I think the tickets are on sale, aren't they?
Save the date, and it will be booking up very quickly. So we'll be talking more about that. But yes, definitely put it in your diary from the 18th to 22nd. Okay. Thank you for your time, Rachel, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you. You too, Alexis. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
See you next time.
Bye.